Somewhere in the frigid Canadian wilderness, in a tightly secured, fenced-off section of icy forest, SCP Foundation Task Force Alpha Beta Omega were locked in a life-or-death situation on the shores of a gruesome pond full of human blood. The staff were used to creatures from other worlds sometimes climbing out of the pond, but they had never seen an incursion of this scale. Creatures of all shapes and sizes were coming out of the ghoulish red goo, and the Foundation's weapons were useless. A floating orb made of black metal instantly killed 3 mobile task force members with a radiation blast, while another 2 were picked up and carried off by a creature that resembled a gigantic bat. The other team members were helpless to save him, as they were too busy trying to fight off an enormous bear-like creature that shot poison spines out of its back. Others still were dragged down into the blood pond by a massive pair of crab claws. The leader of the mobile task force knew exactly what he had to do now: call in the Foundation's newest secret weapon. Once he made the call, it was only moments before that secret weapon leaped over the Area 354 fence and landed by the red pond. He was wearing a yellow jumpsuit, red boots, and had a magnificent bald head. It was Saitama, once just a hero for fun, now a hero for hire for the SCP Foundation. Saitama wasted no time getting to work. A snarling creature that looked like a cross between a wolf and a dinosaur stalked towards him, still dripping red liquid from having just come out of the red pool. The creature roared, but Saitama was unfazed and punched it back into the pool. Next, he turned to the killer orb, which fired a beam at him. He was nearly able to dodge it before punching the orb so hard that it exploded. Then he punched the bear creature before it could fire any more poison spikes. The flying monster tried to swoop Saitama, but when it got low enough to grab him, he turned the tables by punching through its wing. The creature spun out of control and crashed into the electrified fence, dying instantly. Creatures kept rising up from the pond, and Saitama kept on punching them back in. Finally, he punched the giant crab claws, causing them to crack and shatter into a million tiny pieces. This was what most days were like at Saitama's new job working for the SCP Foundation. Every morning for the past week, he would get up, get dressed, clock in at the Foundation, and just kind of hang around until someone had an emergency that he could fix with his superlative punching. You might think that someone who could defeat any monster in one punch would be annoying or arrogant, but outside of being able to punch extremely good, Saitama was a pretty chill guy, so it hadn't taken him long to become well-liked by most of the Foundation staff. He was a bit of a slacker sometimes, but as far as anyone else was concerned, he earned it by single-handedly punching away some of the Foundation's most persistent problems. He already punched SCP-682, SCP-096, the Laughing Men, the Heart of Darkness, and now he'd saved countless people from the potential threat of a monster attack from SCP-354, the Red Pool. He had well and truly earned hero status. However, there was one person in the Foundation who didn't like Saitama. The one person who had technically survived a bout with him, SCP-076. The immortal warrior, known as Abel, was getting really tired of hearing how great this Saitama guy was. And who could blame him? Only the day after he'd last regenerated in his coffin, he found out that the guy who had killed him most recently was now working with the people who were trying to keep him locked up. Abel was a proud warrior. He was inhumanly strong and fast and proficient with pretty much any type of weapon you could think of. He saw every fight as a new and exciting challenge, and worked hard to hone his combat skills over his impossibly long life. He loved the thrill of war more than anything, but Saitama was the total opposite. He didn't have the warrior spirit at all. The Chrome Dome Crusader put almost no effort into his fights whatsoever. He seemed to take no joy in fighting, and since he killed all his enemies in one punch, there was no sport to it. Abel couldn't stand the idea that he could have been bested by such a disgrace to the art of combat. As long as he was alive, he would not let this stand. Saitama had no idea that Abel was plotting his downfall. In fact, Saitama wasn't even entirely sure who Abel was. They hadn't had any time to talk the last time they'd met each other, on account of how Saitama had punched him into space immediately before Abel had said even a single word. One day, Saitama was having a cup of coffee and relaxing after a brief but stressful excursion to go punch SCP-1155, the killer's street art. SCP-1155 had been on a brick wall at the time, so punching it had hurt Saitama's knuckles a little bit, but he was totally fine otherwise. Suddenly, as he was drinking his coffee and thinking about what video game he'd want to play when he went home later, he heard the alarm go off. It was the situation that all SCP Foundation members dreaded, a containment breach. Personnel were running to emergency battle stations. The windows were instantly sealed with metal barriers, and an automated voice blared in every room telling all personnel to remain calm. "That seems kinda weird," said Saitama. "Well, guess I probably need to do something." Little did he know, the alarm had gone off because Abel had broken free of his cell, and now Abel was coming straight for him. Before Saitama could leave the room, Abel kicked the door down and drew his dual obsidian daggers, pointing them both at Saitama.
"There you are, you pathetic worm,"
Abel roared.
"I demand a rematch."
"Oh hey, you're that guy from the other day," said Saitama. This only made Abel more enraged. How was it possible that this man still had no idea who he was? Nobody who survived a fight with Abel had ever forgotten him before, not for as long as they lived. Abel let out a battle cry and charged at Saitama, swinging his obsidian blades. Saitama instinctively wound up to punch him, and before Abel could even land a blow, Saitama's fist had made contact with his chest. The force of the punch was enough to send Abel through the wall, back out into the hallway, then through the wall again into a D-class testing room. "Wow, what's that guy's problem?" Saitama asked, rolling the shoulder of his punching arm. He decided not to dwell too much on the subject, and instead went to go tell his superiors that it was all taken care of, and that they could turn the alarm off. Abel came to after regenerating in his sarcophagus, and from the second he revived, he was absolutely fuming. He had just suffered yet another humiliating defeat from the same worthless opponent. Abel had fought against the Persians in 550 BC. He'd slain medieval knights in the Crusades. He'd even gone toe-to-toe with elite Viking berserkers. Some great warriors of the past had defeated him, but never as quickly. How was it that a nobody like Saitama was able to kill him in one punch every single time? Surely, it would be impossible for the same thing to happen 3 times in a row. Nobody, not even Abel himself, was that strong. Saitama, meanwhile, was starting to wonder just who this weirdo with all the tattoos was, and why he seemed so angry at Saitama specifically. So he asked around the Foundation and found out the basics, that his name was Abel, and he was an immortal warrior that could summon weapons out of nothing and had an unquenchable bloodlust that caused him to enter a rage state that only stopped when he was killed. Saitama didn't need to know much more than that, because he felt like the basic gist was enough. Saitama asked to see Abel's sarcophagus, and even though it was technically beyond Saitama's clearance, the Foundation scientist in charge of Abel's containment allowed him to. The scientist led Saitama to the elevator, which led down into Area 25B, a solid stone containment chamber at the end of a long tunnel. The scientist didn't see much harm in bringing Saitama down there. After all, Saitama had already killed Abel twice already, almost instantly, so he probably wasn't in all that much danger. "Oh, this looks pretty cool," Saitama said, observing the black sarcophagus through the window of the reinforced bulletproof cube it was contained in. He didn't mention the fact that the length of time it took to get to Area 25B made Abel's coffin seem kind of underwhelming. The scientist explained to Saitama that Abel didn't always reanimate straight away, and most of the time he was in a death-like stasis inside the coffin. As Saitama pondered Abel's situation, the coffin lid suddenly unlocked and swung open. Out came Abel, who summoned an enormous warhammer which he used to smash through the wall of the containment cube. The scientist screamed and started running, but Saitama stood his ground, an inscrutable expression on his face.
"You again,"
Abel bellowed.
"I refuse to let you continue to mock me like this. Stand and fight like a true warrior, or die like a coward."
Saitama did neither of those things. He simply announced, "Normal punch!" before punching Abel in the face. Abel crumpled to the ground, his body dissolving into ash in front of Saitama. Inside the containment room, the sarcophagus slammed shut on its own. Saitama shrugged and left, adopting a fast walk so he could get to the elevator at the end of the tunnel before all of Area 25B was flooded with seawater. It would be a while until Abel tried to escape again. Unburdened by those annoying attempts on his life from Abel, Saitama continued his work with the SCP Foundation. He punched SCP-035, the possessive mask, out of a researcher's hands before they had a chance to put it on. Once punched, the mask's face immediately changed from its comedy state to the face of tragedy, before shattering from the force of the punch. Next, Saitama was brought along to attend a funeral that had been infected by an instance of SCP-2852, aka Cousin Johnny. In front of dozens of confused onlookers, Saitama managed to punch Cousin Johnny before he could begin reading a mind-altering eulogy that would turn the funeral into a grotesque blood magic ritual. That mission was particularly awkward, so Saitama made sure to apologize profusely to the grieving family members before they were all administered amnestics. Man, this job gets pretty weird sometimes, Saitama said to himself while relaxing after another productive day of punching. But he wouldn't be able to rest for long. The facility was under attack, not from an escaped anomaly, but from the outside. From seemingly all directions, they were swarmed by warped, fleshy abominations and sarkic cultists in blood-red robes made of skin. Turns out that this facility was holding one of their sacred artifacts, and the cult was keen to get it back. The guards stood no chance, as those who weren't grabbed by the mutated soldiers were turned into mutants themselves by the cultists. The facility went into lockdown, but it wasn't fast enough. Like the infections they worshipped, the Sarkists moved quickly and were very difficult to wipe out. The facility quickly devolved into chaos. Anyone who tried to fight back against the cult were either brutally dispatched or transformed into mutants who would serve the Sarkic's purposes. And in the midst of all this chaos was Saitama. He knew he might be the only one who could stop this onslaught, but there were so many opponents, more than he'd ever have to face at once since joining the Foundation. And frankly, these guys were pretty gross. Saitama wasn't going to be able to do this alone, and there was only one other person around he could ask for help. Saitama went back to Area 25B, down the elevator, and down the extremely long corridor to Abel's holding cell. The cube which contained his coffin had been repaired, and the surrounding area was no longer flooded with seawater. Saitama wasn't sure the best way to get Abel's attention, so he just knocked on the wall. Abel's coffin swung open, and Abel stepped out, his face instantly twisting with rage as soon as he saw Saitama. "Hey, don't try and kill me this time, okay?" Saitama said. "I need your help with something."
I would never lower myself so much as to help you,
Abel sneered. Saitama couldn't help but wonder if this guy would ever just chill the heck out, or if he was just like this all the time. He calmly explained the situation to Abel, hoping this would change his mind. As could probably be expected though, Abel didn't much care if the Foundation was destroyed by a cult that worshipped infections. So, Saitama decided to change his tactics a little bit. "Help me save the facility from these Sarkic guys, and I'll give you a rematch," Saitama said. "And it'll be a fair fight. I'll take it seriously and everything."
Finally, you show a shred of honor, Abel roared. Very well, you have a deal.
He summoned up a giant hammer again and smashed through the wall. Abel and Saitama burst back into the facility, just as the cultists were mashing the bodies of some Foundation scientists into a giant multi-armed behemoth.
Finally, a worthy opponent!
The mutant monster roared and charged, but Abel drew an enormous two-handed sword out of thin air and handily fought off every one of its attacks. Meanwhile, Saitama started punching cultists like there was no tomorrow. One cultist activated a sigil that summoned up tentacles made of solid blood, but Saitama punched them so hard that they instantly melted. Another cultist cast a spell over himself that caused a gooey scab-like texture to coat his body in a protective layer that would infect anyone who touched it with flesh-eating bacteria. This might have theoretically protected him from getting punched, but it didn't protect him from Abel's obsidian sword, which came down swiftly and killed the cultist in one blow. Between Abel's armory of supernatural weapons and Saitama's fists of fury, the previously insurmountable threat of the Sarkist cult was done for. The few that survived the epic onslaught retreated, abandoning the artifact they'd come here to steal in the first place. When the fight was over, the two warriors surveyed the carnage around them. This is gonna take a lot of effort to clean up," said Saitama. "Glad that's not my job." He was about to thank Abel for helping him out, but before he could say anything, the immortal warrior drew a one-handed short sword and held it towards Saitama.
I helped you,
Abel said.
Now you must fulfill your end of the agreement.
Saitama sighed, took the dagger, and adopted a fighting stance. He reasoned that since Abel had done him a solid, he could at least try and give him a chance. Abel let out a battle cry and swung his own sword. Saitama dodged the swipe easily. He meant to parry the strike, but out of pure muscle memory, he blocked with his opposite hand and swung a right hook at Abel's face. Abel's head exploded instantly on contact. Saitama shrugged and decided it was probably time to clock off for the day.